James Lawrence, who was captain of the Chesapeake ship during the War of 1812. Now, we don't hear much about that war, but that was caused by England impressing sailors and putting them on the British ships, and they never were seen again. And I think that's what happened to Betsy Ross's second husband. Betsy was married 3 times, though, so she had a generous allotment of men. And so this was something I read, and I think it's true. This is the capital of Gwinnett County, the only town in Gwinnett County for over 40 years. So some of the very first things that happened in the county happened in Lawrenceville. The county was named for Button Gwinnett, who was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. He signed that declaration in 1776, and then before a year had passed, Button Gwinnett got into an argument with a man named Lackland McIntosh. And Lackland McIntosh called Button Gwinnett a lying, cheating scoundrel, which was probably the truth. But at that time, you had to challenge somebody to save your honor. You challenged somebody to a duel. And so one May morning in a field in Savannah, Georgia, where there's a seafood restaurant now, they met and took the required number of paces, turned, and shot at each other. Old Button got shot in the knee, I think it was. I was not there. But Button Gwinnett developed gangrene and died 3 days later. He left a wife and a daughter, and they went to South Carolina, but they soon passed from the scene. So he left no direct descendants. But his family came from Wales, and you know the actress Gwyneth Paltrow, that Gwyneth is a derivation of Gwinnett. Okay, let's just look over there at the courthouse. It's the centerpiece of our town. The crown jewel of Lawrenceville is that beautiful courthouse. Originally, this one was a Romanesque building with a lot of curves and stuff going on. Built in about 1770, and then it was burned, and arsonists burned it, and it was rebuilt. And this building, it's been renovated, not restored, but renovated. And it dates back, though, to 1885. This was not the first courthouse. The first courthouse around Lawrenceville was about 1.5 miles on the Old Norcross Road, 1.5 miles from this area. But they hadn't decided for sure on the county seat town. Now, the county seat town of Lawrenceville has been accused of being located in the worst place that they could have found. It's a hill separates parts of the town. Most towns put their courthouse up high on the hill, but we put our schoolhouse up high on the hill. That shows what regard we had for education, doesn't it? And I think that's great. But if you look at the iron fence, first of all, let me show you that little balcony up there. When I was a little girl, I was born in Lawrenceville. And when I was a little girl, I was the last of 6, and so I just roamed the streets. My mother had gotten tired of having children, and I was just an outdoor child anyhow. I had a good time. It was wonderful, a way to grow up. But that little balcony is called the bailiff's balcony. And that's where, when the court was in session, the bailiff would come out and say, "Hear ye, hear ye. Court is now in session." Okay. During the early times when this courthouse was first, and Lawrenceville was first organized, Lawrenceville came about in 1821, Gwinnett in 1818. So that sort of gives you a time span. But the free range laws were in existence. That meant that cows and pigs and horses, mules, whatever animal we had, just roamed around at will. They weren't fenced in. And the court room was on the first floor, and they would wander into the courtroom and interrupt court proceedings. The judges got tired of trying to sentence somebody and a pig walked in, or a goat. And so they decided to give the 4 corners free of charge to 4 lawyers. Now that's really asking the fox to watch the hen house, isn't it? And I have lawyers in my family. That's the reason I'm so untrusting. I know what they do. But the 4 lawyers were supposed to keep a fence around the courthouse so that the animals couldn't get in. Well, they first erected an Abe Lincoln fence, and folks were keeping fires burning in their homes then, and they'd come up and steal wood, and they'd tear the fence down. And then they decided to build a higher, and took a long time for them to catch on. They built another wooden fence, and the same thing happened. At last, they decided to build an iron fence, and that's what they did. And that's been called the cursive law in the state of Georgia, that we gave 4 corners to 4 lawyers. And I think it was probably made light of in the state legislature. There was a man named Mr. Brand who used to sit on those steps and loan money to people. And he'd loan it at interest. And they got tired of him sitting there and saying, do you need to borrow money? Do you want to borrow money? And he'd do it and aggravate people. So they decided that he would have to leave the courthouse steps. And he bought this property right down here that belonged to Charles Henry Smith, Bill Arp, whose later pen name was Bill Arp. And they bought the building, it was a brick building, but that's not the original building. And it came about in 1805. So they have already celebrated 100 years in the same location. And Brand Bank has several branches. But an old Mr. Brand's picture is in there if you go in that bank. It's just a neat piece of history that's in there. We have a great military museum in the courthouse. You go to weddings, and I don't think we've had a funeral there, but probably we will. And have entertainment on the lawn. It's great. And there's something else I want to tell you, but when we're coming down Perry Street, I'll tell you about that. The first apartment building in the county was probably where the fountain is. And it was originally Spence's, and then he sold it to Mr. McGee, and Mr. McGee sold it to Mr. Alford. So the original stores, businesses, though, were up on North Perry. I'll point that out. Okay? Yeah, that's a good idea not to hit them in the back. Yeah, I think you're always charged if you hit folks in the back, aren't you? We don't have to be charged. But we have some great restaurants in downtown Lawrenceville. But this used to be just grocery stores all over town. And my dad had a grocery store down in here, and we lived on Lucky Street, and we didn't have a telephone. Nobody had telephones back then. You just talked to each other. And you look folks in the face and talk to them. That was really unusual today, isn't it? We were an unplugged generation. But if you look to your left, that's the back of the Aurora Theater. How many of you have been to the Aurora? It's a great opportunity, and they're going to do Les Miserables next fall. The music to Les Miserables makes you want to go over to France again, doesn't it? It does. And we're going to turn right here. There's the Oaks House, the visitor center. And Mr. Jewel Oaks lived there at one time, and he was mayor of Lawrenceville. But what I remember most, Mr. Jewel could square dance like nobody's business. And he taught all the young folks how to dance over at the American Legion Hall. He'd just grab you up and hold you and dance like everything. I loved it. Of course, I was a heavy sinner during my youth. Do we have...
Do you want to do a draw?
Yeah. Now we're going to stop here just a minute. Look at that beautiful purple butterfly bush. Don't you love that? We're going to do let me tell you about Honest Alley, and then we're going to do a drawing. When I was a little girl, this was a dirt road. Did anybody grow up in Lawrenceville? Anybody live here for a long time? Y'all don't remember when it was a dirt road. There was a blacksmith shop on the corner, and there were mules and horses. There was a lot of horse trading in the alley, a lot of gambling, a lot of bootlegging, and I loved it. I would just stop in Honest Alley and visit, and it took a long time. That blacksmith was my name, Mr. Tiller, and you could go and watch him get those things hot and hammer them into shape. Gosh, it was great. I can still remember doing that. It'd be hot in there, about as hot as y'all are now. But occasionally they'd have a medicine show, and a wild Indian would run through the audience, and that was just, I thought that was great, because our only entertainment was going to church, and and I needed to tell you the truth, but going to church, and occasionally you could go to the movies, and it cost a dime to get in the movies, and a quarter for adults. I think it was a dime and a quarter. I worked at the Colonial Theater. During my youth, I sold popcorn. I tell people I was in the theater. And I was. But, okay, let's have a drawing if you'll start. Just a minute.
All right. Oh, we got to have our number.
886. The last.
886.
All right.
Here, you got it. And we've got a beautiful mug stuffed with all kinds of goodies from the LTTA, which is the visitor center that we're going to get dropped off at.
This other house up here on your left belonged to a man named Jim Bob Oakes at one time. And Jim Bob was really active in the horse trading business. All those Oakeses were. Oakes, and not like the tree. But Jim Bob, one time we got some baby ducklings that were caught in the sewer under the city, and they were quacking and quacking and quacking, and they couldn't get out. And Jim Bob, this was brilliant, we thought, he got the mother duck and tied her to a stake, tied a rope around her leg and put the stake in the ground, and she quacked and brought the baby ducklings to her. I think that was a great idea, and it's one of my memories. Of course, another memory, we had a sheriff who collected bootleg whiskey, and no, he didn't drink it, but he sold it. He resold it, and so they decided that wasn't the right thing to do, and we had a ceremony one morning, and they had to pour the liquor down one of the manholes uptown. Of course, he lost the election after that. That was not conducive to being an honest candidate, was it? Okay. Look at the butterfly bushes along the way.
Very pretty.
They are so pretty. And this is the First Baptist Church, which dates back to 1849. The little chapel does. Of course, this is the new addition. Every preacher has to add something to it, I think, for his resume. I don't know what it is, but they always have a building program. And this clothing ministry, anybody can buy gently used clothes. Sometimes they are. I bought overalls in there. Not these. I got these at Penny's. Okay, we're going to turn right onto Lucky Street. And let me tell you a little bit of the history of Lucky Street. All the streets have interesting names, and they're named for a reason. The Lucky Street, though, was named Sassafras Alley. When my folks moved to town, we lived out on Northdale Road, which is about a mile from the city courthouse. And we moved to town, and Dad had the store up on Crogan Street and Sassafras Alley. And it didn't open up to Jackson Street. But my mother didn't want to live on an alley, and she said we were so lucky to get to move to downtown Lawrenceville that she went to the city council and asked them to change the name. And I'm serious. This really happened. It really happened. And but you couldn't get them to change the name that easily now. But this was, and there were no street signs. We didn't have street signs until I think it was in the 50s when they. And this is going to be a great park. Well, this is parking for the Baptist Church. But on up here, it's called Lawrenceville Lawn. And about where this sign is, the orange sign, right in there is where my house was when I was growing up. Here.
And what's happening
This is Lawrenceville lawn, and that's it's a work in progress. And see the little privy there. I thought, man, we've come full circle, because when we moved down here on this street, everybody had a privy. Folks didn't have indoor plumbing, and I thought, yeah, and I thought it was wonderful when we got indoor plumbing. I like to flush it to death, because had to lock it up so I couldn't get in. So I put things in there and watch them disappear. I thought it was magic. Okay, now we're going to turn to the right. This big building, the main sanctuary, we're going up here and park for just a minute, I hope. Okay, that sanctuary right there was where Jake Ambrose lived. And he had a daughter named Haley. And she married Lawrence Exum, and they lived over across the street where they're doing the the Lawrenceville lawn. There was a beautiful house over there, and they lived in that. This was a really nice 2-story house. But they tore the house down. I am so sorry that it left. And in 1962, this building became available. And then they've redone it a couple of times since then. The walk is the walk of history. We have, let me tell you about that. One July, some Mexicans and me laid that walk. Now that was hard work. And I didn't know how to cuss in Spanish, but I did in English. It was hard work. And it was just like being in a sauna. But we got it laid. And it has the names of some of our members. You can still buy a brick. They're $50 each. But it's kind of interesting to go up there and see the names. Some of them, we have a few right here in the front, but most of them are farther back. And what sort of made it hard was people would call and want a whole bunch of folks put together in the same place. And that was a little difficult, because when you're putting those bricks, they get heavy after a while. But I'm real proud of it. I think it's a nice touch to our church. And this building right up here is the one that dates back to, well, the cornerstone was laid for it in 1899, but the church was constituted in 1849. Now right over there is where the Sotheby's is now, but that's where the first supermarket in Lawrenceville was, and it started in 1958. And it was really a boon to the town that we got a supermarket that you could actually walk around and choose your own groceries. That was really.
Oh, they just accused me for another drawing. Okay. That's We got some goodies from the farmer's market.
Okay. 874.
874. We got dinner in the bag for 874.
And I have another one.
Is it 874?
874. Look at your ticket.
The last three numbers.
874.
Oh, it might have been a leftover from last week.
Yeah.
Thought I got them all out. You got another one?
882.
882. We have. Let me tell you this. This is awesome. And this is what the trolley tour is all about. All the local businesses have pulled together to put this on and to contribute the prizes and to host it and to sponsor it. We have a wonderful vendor at the market. They are called Phoenix Gardens. He has put in here red potatoes, yellow squash, snap peas, and a whole fresh chicken. So you have dinner in a bag. There you go.
Thank you. Oh, man.
Let's do another one while we're here.
Wow. Wow, that's nice.
It is. Okay, this one is 878.
878.
That's one of them. I don't know which one, but here you go. Mom or Dad.
I've never
received 78. And I was
Okay, I got a Poppy shirt.
all
Who
right.
wants it? Poppy? Does Poppy want it? Donated by Poppy's,
That's a
which
good
is just
restaurant.
down at Lawrenceville, Swanee.
Look at that.
That's
It's a
good
Cuban restaurant.
Very
Amazing. If you haven't been there, please go by.
Caribbean, where you
And tell them you found out
from?
about them on the Trolley tour.
All right. It's a good restaurant. Gerald, did you Caribbean or dad? That's the restaurant, the Cuban restaurant that we've been to. You've been there.
Okay, let me tell you about this. Right up here on the left, the building with the arches, that was Salmon Funeral Home, one of the first funeral homes. Before he opened the funeral home in town, the undertaker, and I love that name because it tells it all, doesn't it? It's very descriptive, would go to the houses and embalm people. And I had a friend on Jackson Street that they got the first indoor plumbing on Jackson Street, and several people died, and he said most of his neighbors got flushed down his toilet because the undertaker would take the remains. That's not very nice of me to say that, but I thought it was kind of interesting. And that's what makes small towns, is interesting stories. Now, this one with the arches was Salmon Funeral Home. And they advertised that if you were a Baptist, your funeral was a little bit cheaper because they could carry the remains across the street to the church.
Oh, wow.
And nobody had their funeral in the funeral home then. You either had it at home or at church. And so when they walked the remains across the street, that's what they did when my dad died. They walked the remains. And I think that's kind of interesting that you could get a bargain funeral. You can't do it anymore. A lot of people probably would do that.
Wasn't there somebody famous that was shot over here?
It's over on down the other street.
Oh, yes.
But we did one morning. People woke up in the 1920s and there was a body hanging in the courthouse on a tree in the main entrance to the courthouse. And the fellow had committed suicide. He was in his 20s and he owed a lot of money. It was one of the saddest stories that occurred in Lawrenceville. Okay, we can go. Now we're going up North Clayton Street. And this is named for a Clayton who was a legislator. Augustine Clayton, I think was his name. And he was also, let me see, he was a legislator, and he worked with the city council, and that's the same Clayton that Clayton County and Clayton, Georgia is named for. Yeah, same one. There's another view of Honest Alley. And right down there, that where you came out of Honest Alley, we had a Dr. Williams, and he parked in Honest Alley. And when he got a house call, he backed out into this street and never looked. But people knew that Dr. Williams was going to be backing out, so they dodged. He never hit anybody. Now, right here, where this brick building is, was where the Perry home was. And I can still see Mr. Perry, Mr. Green Perry, worked in town, but they had a cow. And he would take the cow down Clayton Street to the city pasture every morning and then go and get it in the afternoon. Can you imagine taking a cow down there now? You can't even think about it. Now we're going to cross Pike Street, and it was named for Zebulon Pike. And Zebulon, Georgia, you remember that? And Pike County, that's the same man. It's Pike's Peak, okay? He was killed in the War of 1812. Famous man. This is on your right up here. This big, beautiful house. William Simmons originally was the original owner and builder of this house, and he owned land all the way to the depot. Isn't that a gorgeous home? But it was later, he had a son named James P. Simmons, and James was editor of the newspaper, and his newspaper office was later in the, not this immediate building, but on the other side. And they had some differences over the war between the states. You know, the delegates from Gwinnett County voted not to secede, but the majority voted to secede from the Union. Dr. W.P. Ezard bought this house in the 1930s, and no, maybe in the 40s, but anyhow, y'all might want to check up on that. He and his second wife had 2 children, and that's where they lived. And right here is the second location of the Lawrenceville Presbyterian Church. And it was later the library, and then the Historical Society occupied that building. And next to it, that white brick building is the first apartment house in Lawrenceville, and it's still an apartment house. People still rent apartments there. Yeah, it's kind of an unusual design. And the gray house on up there, I don't know, probably, I don't know. I bet it's not too much though. This gray house, if you'll pull up just a little bit, if you can. That gray house with the red shutters. They didn't have you go to school at Central Gwinnett. You didn't go to Lawrenceville High School though, did you? Anybody? But I went to Lawrenceville High School, and the grammar school was in the part of the building where the high school was. And one of my teachers was Miss Mary Alice Juhan. And Miss Mary Alice had a pencil with a huge eraser on it. And she'd go around and hit you on the head if you didn't know your tables. We're the kids in here. I don't imagine a teacher would do that now. I hope not. Miss Mary Alice was I didn't ever learn my tables. I learned to dodge Miss Mary Alice Juhan though. But one thing we'd try really hard to get her to bend over so we could see her bloomers. Now, doesn't that speak something about the time when I grew up? And this is a beautiful old Cooper home. I love that house. And this is where the man who built the clock, who put the clock in the courthouse, Mr. Shackelford, he was a genius jeweler, and he lived there. Okay, we're going down North Clayton Street, and this was the scene in 1911 of a man named Mr. Wallace came home in a real snit. He shot his wife and 2 children and then turned the gun on himself. So they never knew. It was Halloween night, 1911, when he did that. He was a member of the First Baptist Church and a member, supposed to be in good standing. But his wife was buried, and he was buried too, up at Hog Mountain Cemetery. And they never, they were not buried together. She was his second wife, and nobody knew why in the world he did that. Now we're going to stop for just a minute. Try not to fall.
Don't follow Miss Mary.
Okay. This is Choo Choo. Choo Choo Restaurant. It's open on Sundays and Saturdays for lunch. And they have a great little gift selection in there, homemade things. Great stuff, handicraft. So if you have a chance, come down here and see what they have, because it's worth it, worth a trip. Hey, Linda.
Hey, Miss Mary. That step is hard.
We can get somebody to push, and you have to pull.
Hey y'all, we're so glad that you got to stop by. We have vendors here with all different kinds of homemade crafts, aprons, flower arrangements, earrings, jewelry, paintings, whatever. But we also have on Saturdays from 11 to 2 we have a small buffet, and on Sundays from 11 to 2 we have a huge buffet. And the price on Sunday is $12, And we would love for you to come and join us. And come back anytime and shop.
Now what times?
Oh, shopping is from 9 until 4 on Saturdays. But then if you see something you like on Sundays, you know I'll always have my hand out for money. I've been told I'm a typical woman. But I'm glad y'all got to stop today, and please come and see us, okay?
It's the Choo Choo Cafe. C-H-E-W, C-H-E-W.
In July, we haven't picked the perfect date yet, but in July we're going to have another ice cream churn off. And Miss Mary Long is one of our judges.
Yes, and I reluctantly accepted.
Oh, yeah, she reluctantly.
She's sacrificing.
In fact, I called and said, when are we going to do it? That's a great opportunity to get ice cream.
Thank you, sweetie.
Henry,
Yes.
let's wait just a minute. I'm going to tell them about the train. But I'm going to tell you, if you're interested, I have 2 of these about Lawrenceville books, and they're $20 each. So if you want one, they're $20 or more.
Yeah, she'll take the and more.
Yeah. But during World War II, which was, I consider that my war, because I knew a lot of people who left Lawrenceville and never came back. This was a time when we were really patriotic. We thought John Wayne was one of the soldiers, but he never was in service. But the troop trains used to come through here, and soldiers who were going heaven knows where would throw off their names and addresses, and people from Lawrenceville would write to them. I remember coming down here and picking up a name and address, and some of the last letters that those soldiers probably got came from Lawrenceville. And I think that's one of the neatest things that we ever did. And some of you may have known one of the mayors, Rhodes Jordan, who was mayor elected 9 times. Well, Rhodes was in the Navy, and he was being sent overseas, and so he wrote home and told them what time his troop train would be coming through Lawrenceville. And so his family gathered down here, and that was the last time they saw Rhodes for nearly 3 years. So,
And that park is named after him, right?
Rhodes Jordan Park, and his daughter's mayor now.
Connecting all of the
Yeah.
names of all of the streets, Shackelford, and everything that I'm seeing, but just didn't know the history.
Yeah. 879.
Who has 879? You got a beautiful, from the LTTA again, Lawrenceville Trade Tourism. We have a beautiful brand bank ornament.
Isn't that pretty? Now I'm going to sit down when we go up this steep hill, because I don't want to go up it too.
We're turning go downhill when we're going uphill.
I don't want to. We're turning up Perry Street, and that was named for Admiral Perry, who was also in the War of 1812. Admiral Perry, Oliver Hazard Perry was his name. You think of the Dukes of Hazzard when you hear that. But Oliver Hazard Perry was a good friend to James Lawrence. And when James was wounded, fatally, mortally wounded, his men were taking him below deck, and he said, "Don't give up the ship." Well, that had been used as a motto before, but Admiral Perry had it embroidered on a flag and flew it on his ship, and the Navy adopted that officially as the official Navy motto: "Don't give up the ship." Now, we are an inland city, but to be connected so with naval people in the War of 1812, I think that's kind of interesting.
What year was the War of 1812?
1812 to 1815.
I was being
It was,
funny.
oh, I thought you wanted
That
the
was-
ending date.
No, that was actually a joke from when I was in elementary school.
Yeah, that's right. When is the 4th of July?
Oh, my granddad was
Okay.
Now there were houses all up and down this street, all up and down every street in Lawrenceville. There were houses, and with children in them usually. Folks were pretty prolific back then. And
that was here.
we're coming up. There was a Church of God down in here at one time. And this tract of land was deeded to the city for schools and churches. And originally the Baptist church and the Methodist church and the Presbyterian church were up here on this location. Now I will get to the place where the Methodist church was at first. This was the second location for the Methodist church. It's called Academy Hill. And this is where Lawrenceville High School and Lawrenceville Grammar School were. We had a Lawrenceville city system. Now, you remember me telling you about Jake Ambrose living in that house where the church is. His daughter was Lily, and the first graduating class was in 1899, and Lily Ambrose, because her name started with an A, got the first diploma that was ever handed out in a public school in Gwinnett County. And I remember babysitting with Miss Lily Ambrose's mother, Mrs. Exum, when Miss Lily went to church. And Miss Lily, the church was right next door. Miss Lily wore a hat and gloves, and she had a parasol that she had over her head. She had lily white skin though, but a beautiful lady. And she taught school. She taught English up there, because I remember her hitting me on the chin and saying, "Don't say ain't." And after she died was the first time I felt free enough to say ain't. And I've said it ever since. But in 1944, an arsonist set fire to this building, the high school building. It had a wooden floor that had been soaked with oil to clean it. And he poured kerosene all in the auditorium on a March night and threw a match in, and it just went up like lighterwood knots, like kindling. It burned, and the fire department came, but it too late. And we thought we were going to be out of school. I mean, you hate to rejoice, but we did. And they bought this house right here. This was the Cooley house. And that's where I went to high school, in that house. It was built in 1910 by Professor Ware, W-A-R-E. So when you hear the Ware House in Lawrenceville, it's not W-E-A-R, it's W-A-R-E, built in 1910. And a man lives upstairs. He owns it. His dad was principal at school when I graduated, Mr. Gower, and he lives in it now, upstairs. But it's pretty much like it was when Professor Ware built it. And they used to have teas and entertainments there. I would love to have seen it lit up at night for a party, but of course they did not have electricity either when it was first built. Well, electric lights came to Lawrenceville though in 1903, so 1910 they would have had it. This was where the telephone office was at one time. The telephone office was upstairs on Croghan Street in one of those buildings next to where the Dominic's is now, originally, so that's where it started. The newspaper office was there at one time, but before that it was in this corner building, and then the Gwinnett Journal was in the other corner building for a while. But this is Perry Street, and right here is Kelly Clinic, and this is the first thing anywhere near like a hospital that we had. Dr. Kelly, Dr. Claude Kelly, delivered babies in there. He did tonsillectomies and occasionally, but an appendectomy was considered serious surgery, and they were sent to Atlanta to get an appendectomy. But before that, Mr. Culver owned the building here, and Dr. Kelly renovated the Culver building, and that's what he put, where he put his medical business. But I can remember going to visit patients there, and it was awesome. It smelled like antiseptic. It had a real hospital smell, like chloroform ether, that smell. And I just often wondered if you breathe deep enough. I tried not to breathe deep. Would you fall into a sleep? And then, now, right down here on the left, right here is where the first brick building in Lawrenceville was constructed. But on your left, right here, if you look, there's a monument that sort of like the Washington Monument, but it has a ball on the top. There are 8 men buried there. Then they were from an Indian war in 1838. Now, Lawrenceville is the only, there are 2 courthouses in the United States that have men buried on the lawn, and Lawrenceville is one of them. The other one is where General MacArthur is buried in Norfolk, Virginia. So that is distinctive about our court lawn. We have music entertainments under the gazebo there, and right on down here at McRae's is where Dr. Ezzard's office was, and Dr. Ezzard had a big black case that he carried, and he concocted his own medication. You didn't go to a pharmacist. And one of those, are you a pharmacist? Well, Dr. Ezzard, did you ever know him? W.P. Ezzard. Oh, you from New York? Do you understand my language? A lot of people don't understand Southerners.
We have a Southern accent now. We have a doctor.
It's them folks that live up north that have the accents.
It sure is.
It ain't us. And Dr. Ezzard's office was over there in that building, and his son was Dr. Ezzard. And right down here, well, Miss Cora Bird lived there at one time. And Miss Cora was a hoot. She walked all over town, and you could just hear her click, click, clicking all over town. And she knew everybody's business. She looked. Well, see, that was back when you had your windows up, and they could hear you fussing and quarreling. Because I know we lived next door to Mr. Saul, and we'd sit on the front porch at night, and Mama would say, "Be really quiet," and you can hear Mr. Saul snore. Now, next door neighbor, you could hear him snore. Larry Flint was walking down here to go to a restaurant where the AutoZone is. He and a lawyer, his lawyer, were walking down that way, and some crazy nut shot him because he was undergoing a trial. Because I personally think he ought to have been locked up long ago, but he's still alive, I think. And it was a pretty filthy magazine. I don't recommend it to anybody. But he was rushed to the hospital, and even President Carter's sister came to pray over him, but he should have been prayed over before then. And this is where Dr. Ezzard lived with his first wife, and they had 3 children. Now, his second wife was that big Simmons house, and they had 2 children. I'll show you where his third wife lived in a little bit. Now, up here on your left is the Martin house. This is where one of my teachers lived, Miss Louise Cooper, and she never married, but she had a really good story. Everybody knew it wasn't true, but it was a good story about one of her fiancés, which she absolutely never had. But now this house is a Martin house, and it was built in 1910, and it is a beautiful house on the inside. The woodwork is just absolutely out of this world. It's mahogany, and the floors are beautiful. It's really one of those old Southern. And up here, on your left, is the museum. Originally was the female seminary. Originally built just for females, and you had to pay tuition to go there. So, but one of the sad stories is they did have a privy out back, and that's an outhouse to the uninformed. But some girls were going out one cloudy morning, and lightning struck and killed one of the girls. She's buried at Fairview Cemetery, and 3 others were pretty severely injured. And this was in the late 1820s. This building dates back to 1854. It burned, and then it was rebuilt. And you can go in and visit and look at the museum stuff. The cornerstone was originally laid by the Masons, and the Masonic Hall is next door, but it wasn't then. The Masons occupied the 2nd floor of the museum. But it has been restored, not renovated. So it's really pretty. Really nice, not pretty. It's just like it would have been back then. And you can get it for meetings, I think. And the Adair house behind it has been moved in, but it's not restored either. It was originally unpainted. Okay. driver. See, I feel like Miss Daisy.
I was gonna say that. I refrained, but I was thinking it.
I never had a driver until he came along. Isn't it wonderful to have somebody that you know is going to get us there safely? This man is
You know,
really.
that's the movie that put Garrett Morgan on the map.
Uh-huh.
I think he was 50 years old when that movie came out.
I like
that's
him.
what put him on the map
Uh-huh.
into acting. He has done a lot.
And what's her name that was Miss Daisy?
Oh,
I think of it. But, huh?
Jessica Tandy.
Yeah, Jessica Tandy. She did some great acting in that
She
too.
wasn't the original. He did the original play, and he was so good they couldn't get anyone as good as him to be the actor, and that's how he got that role.
Well, he was good at it. He
Yeah,
was
they couldn't
good.
get anyone as good as him.
Now I want to show you this beautiful house, this yellow brick house, right there to your left. That's the W.T. Tanner house, and Mr. W.T. Tanner was into everything in Lawrenceville. He was a school commissioner for Gwinnett County. He was in business in a hardware store. He had 10 children, he and his wife did. But the amazing thing to me is, Mr. Tanner, everything was well planned with Mr. Tanner. He had boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl for the 10. I mean, it was right. He knew what he was doing. And I do too. But that house is beautiful inside. I used to visit two of the last two of his children who lived, and Mary was one of them. She taught art in Columbus, Georgia, and then came back here during her retirement years. Mary and Ruby lived there, and then when Ruby died, Mary stayed on until she died in the house where she grew up, built in 1919, and it's for sale, but it's a whole lot of money. Okay. We can go. And this is Nice Street, named for the Nice Automobile Company down on Scenic Highway. It's been there for over 50 years, but they were located here in town at one time. And we had a Belts over there too. But it's a thrift store there now. But Belts was in downtown Lawrenceville when it first came, on Croghan Street. Okay, we're going to turn right.
Instead of the Justice Center?
Oh, okay. We'll go. You can't get, yeah, you can get through.
Yeah.
Pardon me, you knew where you were going. I have a tendency to try to
We'll listen, Miss Mary.
Do we need to get another? Are we?
We can when we get to the memorial.
Okay.
How about that?
Okay. Now this Justice Administration Center took the place and moved a lot of business from downtown Lawrenceville when the county business moved out here. But you can go to court in there, you can eat in there, and you can get sentenced right in the same building. But we have a beautiful Fallen Heroes Memorial down here, and we're real proud of that. And it dates back, people there date back to the Revolutionary War. I don't believe we have a War of 1812 person there, because that would have been before Gwinnett was formed, because Gwinnett dates back to 1818. But look at that big thing. It's where some of your tax money goes. And goes and goes. Yeah, you cannot find parking here. It's hard to find parking. But right here, to your right, is the Fallen Heroes Memorial. And one of the first ones there, one of the first names was Red Wages, who was killed in World War II. He was the first one that I knew of who his plane went down in World War II. He was a graduate of Mercer University, and they named the VFW in Macon. He shares the name with another war hero. But Red was not married, but he was movie star handsome. All the girls just loved him. And I was too young to really know what love was, but I loved him. Everybody did. He was just a neat fellow. His father was Judge Emory Wages, and he had one leg, and when he ran for election, he said, "I'm one-legged Wages." And who would do that now? You can imagine doing that. But that's it. And we have Memorial Day ceremonies and 4th of July ceremonies there. And it's just for quiet contemplation. If you want to just come and sit a while, you can do that. So it's a place of honor for those men who have died. Okay. Look, 872. 872. Anybody have that ticket?
Going once.
I do.
Who does? You just won 2 tickets to the aquarium. Enjoy.
Oh my gosh.
Another one? Okay, let's do another one.
Beyonce tickets. Thinking big now.
Okay. I'll tell you what. Go to the right down here and go up Constitution, and we'll take a right on Trolley to move out on the other side. Yeah, that'll be perfect. That'll be.
Yeah. So bring us back out on down.
Yeah. We're not laying plans to let y'all out.
You're held captive.
We're trying to get the route straight
All right,
out
Miss
here.
Mary, what number you got there?
Okay. 869.
869. Who won?
Sounds like
869.
last week's
It might be.
Uh-oh. Speak up.
Is it
Somebody got
869?
We got it? Excellent. We got another Poppy's t-shirt for you.
Trying to make it sound
There you go. You're welcome.
No.
That's not that like divorce. Take a picture.
You did.
Historic event.
That's the hard thing. Most people are saying this sometimes.
It wasn't bad for me, it was probably bad for him. Oh well.
Okay, wait a minute. Let's see.
Yes, yes. Go right up here.
Right on Constitution. These are magnolia trees. If you're not familiar with the South, that's the flower of the South. But I'm gonna tell you what, it's a dirty tree because it's always dripping. Leaves. They always. Now this is Constitution Avenue, but it runs into Lucky Street. I think they should have kept the same street because it's frustrating to visitors. And I got lost in London because they do that. Did you teach English?
No, my mom's a teacher.
You did? You teach English? English.
But I love history, so you know I'm keeping this up.
Good. Good. I'm glad y'all are here. Now we're gonna go right up here at Culver Street. And let me, hopefully. Oh, is it a wreck up there?
This is where it might be challenging. They moved that white.
this house right over there is a typical old farmhouse look, and that's in Lawrenceville, in the city limits. But it was moved there, I believe it was, because it doesn't match the other houses on Culver Street. And the Culver name was kind of famous in Lawrenceville during the early part of the 19th century, late 1800s and early 1900s. There was a Mrs. Culver who owned a boarding house on this street. And she made great food. And you could buy a really good lunch for about 15 or 20 cents. And for a nickel more, you could get a dessert. And it was just good food. And they named, and Joel Culver had a store uptown. And he was her son. And so,
You want me to jump out and talk to them real quick? Okay.
maybe they want to get out of the way.
Yeah, they backed up. That was nice, but now we can't get started. We'll have to push.
Culver Street really was named for a good cook. And I think that's kind of neat that we have a street in Lawrenceville named for a good cook. Yeah. Because she was. And across the street over there, I think it's the little gray house. Yeah, gray and white. That's where Miss Eddie Mae Rutledge lived. And Miss Eddie Mae could make great lemon pies. Oh man, melt in your mouth lemon pies. We had some really good cooks. And I don't know how they did it, because a lot of them were cooking on a wood stove before we got electric stoves. And then they tried those gas stoves. They were horrible. They smelled bad. And I can remember food that was cooked. I don't know how they got cakes cooked, because you couldn't adjust your temperature. You just had to keep adding fuel. I guess you learned by doing. Passed an ordinance that you couldn't spit on the courthouse floor, because folks would go to court, and a lot of men chewed tobacco back then. I remember, the majority of them did, and they'd just spit anywhere they wanted to, and they had to make an ordinance that you couldn't spit on the floor in the courthouse. Of course, they didn't abide by it, but they made the ordinance. They made an effort.
Wow.
And it was in the 1930s, I think. It was a while before they put indoor plumbing in there. And there was a big article in the newspaper when they put a drinking fountain. Everybody was really proud of that. It's little things that, God, we've come a long way, haven't we? In some ways we have.
Especially modern day.
Yeah, we have. Right, in just a minute. Not this first brick house on your right, but the second one is where Rhodes Jordan lived, and he's the man who was elected mayor 9 times, and he died during the 9th term. He went home one night and went to bed and just didn't wake up. And that was a wonderful way for Rhodes to go, but it was a shock to the whole community. His wife had died several years earlier. She had cancer. And his daughter, Judy, is mayor now. So that's his house. And he told me that what he wanted to do was sit on that porch and watch folks go by when he retired, and he just didn't get to. But he was a great fellow. He went to the Baptist church, and I always tried to sit by him because he knew what was going on with everybody. And he'd tell him, okay,
Fellowship.
yeah, birds of a feather.
Yeah.
Now children from this street walked to the school up on the hill. We didn't have a bus. Everybody walked. Now this is, wait. No, we're not quite, I can't see back.
We're coming right up on it, that White House on your left.
Oh, the artisan. Okay.
That's the Artisan Gallery,
And where's yours?
the salon, and I am in the yellow building right next door. But this is the Artisan Gallery. They have the high-end Aveda products. The stylists are amazing. They'll take it. I'll come and mess up your hair, and you go to them, and they'll fix it. And then we get in front of my place. a 2,000 square foot building. We focus on helping hurting people and giving lifestyle choices. So we are a therapy wellness studio. We offer yoga, Pilates, we do detoxes. We have a motorized inversion table, chi machine, and our forte is the massage. I've personally been in practice for 16 years. I hold a very high standard as far as what therapists I bring on board. If you know someone who is hurting, send them to us and we'll help them. We work very closely with the chiropractors and orthopedics in the area. And if y'all want to grab your raffles out, I've got a 30-minute session to give away.
I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it.
868.
868. Woohoo! All the way to the back of the bus. Have you? Well, testify. Tell everybody about it. Yoga. Yes, Crystal Pack did the yoga. No, she is not. But one of her students, Dawn, is now doing it. And
Right.
if you guys want to
We
join
have
us
another
on
868
Facebook,
up here.
I got 868 too.
if y'all join us on Facebook or like our newsletter, we always have specials and discounts going on as well as health tips. I do. I do have one in my purse. And if you look in your goodie bags, there's a coupon in there to come and try a free yoga or Pilates class of your choice. And you'll have our cards and pricing sheets and information on it. Be sure to go through your goodie bags, guys. There's little nuggets of goodiness all through them. The goodie bags you look up on the LTTA Visitor Center at the end. That way you're not going to run in case you know.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I had this is the first time this year because usually I something one of my placements up on board. Like the Tuesday cafe like you did. And next we're heading to
No,
the
you have a hard
auction
time
house.
standing.
And Miss Lucy will be
Amazed
coming on
at
board.